The first step in drawing from imagination is that you have to have a gesture or a pose that you're going to take and draw. In this sense, I'm using basic lines leading through the figure in the same way that a sculptor would take and be bending armature wires that are going to hold the clay. But I'm leading the eye through the pose so that I take and I'm not following contours. I'm just taking and creating an armature to build my action upon. The next step is to take and develop simple volumes. This is just really a process of containing. In other words, a simple spherical form, building one form, fitting it into another. Essentially, this is the same as we do basic traditional animation, traditional animation or construction of the figure. So as I go back into this figure now, I'm taking and building these simple volumes. This is a step-by-step procedure. None of the steps by themselves are tremendously difficult. The key to this is that you have to have a feeling and a sense for capturing the gesture. And this is a constructive approach to taking and doing the drawing. It's not as you say, drawing from the model where you're copying. The first thing I always tell my class is that we never copy the model. We analyze the model, but we don't copy the model. And then we take and construct and create the figure. We create contours. Now, as I start to go past this, the next step in the drawing is taking and adding anatomical landmarks. Again, this depends on your ability and how much knowledge you have of anatomy. In this sense, I'm taking right at this point, I'm taking and adding pit of the neck, sternum, corners of the ribs, corners of the pelvis. These are very clear-cut anatomical points that we take and we look for. The knowledge that you have in the drawing then, or the knowledge that you have of anatomy, is directly related to how far you can actually take and carry your drawing from imagination. Now, in looking at these details as I draw across these anatomical points, you can notice how they help to emphasize the basic gesture by showing the contrast. On this case, we're seeing a stretching on one side and a compressing on the other side. So as we take and develop this, we have to actually try to understand how these parts compress and push against each other and stretch as they do in reality. Now, at this point, the drawing, these corners, these are also corners. They help to take and show which way the figure. Notice I'm taking and using a simple box-ish form now to help indicate the rib cage and the pelvis. This gives a step that is useful in taking and helping to define where the forms are in space. Now, as you can see now, using that box form, I can take and add a simple cylinder as we feel it fitting into that box. Now, the process then of taking and constructing the figure is really one of taking and using very, very simple geometric forms. At the same time, you are limited in what you can do by your essential anatomical knowledge. So as I start to go farther with the drawing, As I start to go farther with the drawing, I'm taking in constantly using anatomy. And here the clavicles going over the surface and around the neck. I feel the trapezius muscles coming out from behind, the pectoralis muscles pulling off of the chest. You have to actually understand the pattern of how the muscles go. As in his case, I was putting the latissimus dorsi from behind. So, as a professional, you rarely have models that are taking and posing for you. And practically almost never, unless you're doing just a simple set type of thing. If you have to take and deal with numerous action figures, you're even in the beginning stages, you are taking and developing a roughs drawn from imagination. Notice that I'm constantly going over and around the surface of the form as I'm doing the drawing. So the drawing is one of constructing. We don't copy, as I've said before. We don't copy a contour. What we're doing is taking and constructing a contour by the way we develop the forms. So I start from the inside and work out. We use box forms as a means of taking and helping to define these forms in space. Now I'm going to go back over this and bring out these box forms. Notice how in drawing this box, that how clearly it takes and shows the direction of that form in space. Now this is really the same thing that we see in computer drawing. Now this is actually a process that was developed in the 1500s in Italy and I should say the Netherlands. Albert Dürer, we find Cambiaso, Piero della Francesca. When the introduction of perspective forced the artist to take and use points. Well, this is really the same thing that we deal with in drawing and working in a computer, doing any kind of three-dimensional work. So here you can see how the box helps to define these forms in space. And when you're drawing three-dimensionally from imagination, you are always taking and trying to define forms in space. In this case now, I'm not trying to make the shapes of the box duplicate the actual shape of the figure, but to take and show the direction that the forms are taking in space. Now, you can add tone. I'm adding the tone. I'm not using the tone as a means of taking and showing a light source, but merely as a way of helping to define the direction of the forms in space. You use the box as a personal tool to help you understand what the figure is doing.